Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm Terry Moran. Police say they have a suspect in custody after a bomb threat investigation on Capitol Hill. They say a man drove a black pickup truck onto a sidewalk near the Library of Congress. That's right across the street from the U.S. Capitol. The driver told an officer that he had a bomb, and the officer saw what appeared to be a detonator in the man's hand. We've got the latest on that from Washington.
Meanwhile, President Biden is speaking out in an exclusive interview with our own George Stephanopoulos, saying the U.S. military will stay in Kabul as long as it takes to get all Americans out of Afghanistan. This as the Taliban is blocking people from getting to the airport and cracking down on protests. We'll break down the challenge ahead for President Biden and the troops on the ground.
And the people of Haiti are facing multiple crises in the wake of a deadly earthquake and a tropical storm just weeks after the president was assassinated in that country. We've got the latest on the search and rescue efforts in that troubled country.
But we begin with that bomb threat investigation on Capitol Hill. Authorities say a suspect has surrendered without incident and is now in police custody. The Supreme Court, the Library of Congress, and the Cannon House office building were all evacuated while police investigated and negotiated with that suspect. Our Kenneth Moten is there on the scene with more. Kenneth, what can you tell us about the suspect and what was in that truck?
Diane, just an incredible scene here on Capitol Hill. A 5-hour standoff has ended with a suspect identified as Ray Roseberry in custody. The Capitol Police Chief just gave us that update moments ago, but you see here at the Capitol, things are starting to calm down a little bit. We still have a lot of police on this scene, but they're starting to open up the roadways here around the Capitol after that large perimeter was set up during this 5-hour standoff. Again, let me give you the rundown. This suspect, again, by the last name of Roseberry from North Carolina, apparently, according to investigators, he popped the curb. He was on a sidewalk near the Library of Congress, near the Supreme Court. Apparently, a 911 call was made, and investigators got some information that this suspect potentially had a bomb, that he possibly had a detonator in his hand. He was in a very large pickup truck, apparently with tinted windows. They couldn't see inside the vehicle. So for the past 5 hours or so, they tried to make contact. And once they got a cell phone to him, they were able to communicate with him. And you went through hours of negotiations here on Capitol Hill as this scene, this perimeter that was so large around the area really brought some fear into the people who saw it. And as we saw it here, we know that when it comes to the Capitol, any potential threat is a big one, and it's taken seriously. And so even though investigators didn't know exactly what they had here, they worked through it and they tried to find out as much information about the suspect, especially when they learned of a live stream, apparently, by the suspect while he was in the vehicle. We were able to monitor some of that live stream and see some of the ramblings that he was saying throughout his time inside that vehicle on Capitol Hill. And what we know is that investigators use that information from that live stream to try to gain as much information as possible about any potential threat, to see if he actually had any active explosives, any bombs inside that vehicle. Did he? At this point, what we understand from the police chief is that after he surrendered, he got out of the vehicle, he surrendered. They are still checking that vehicle as we speak, but at this point, they've started to open up roads around the Capitol Hill complex, but that area where the car is, right there in front of the Library of Congress and the Supreme Court, is still blocked off at this point.
All right. Thanks, Kenneth. Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas is here in Washington. Pierre, a tense few hours, as Kenneth was just describing for us. How did this investigation unfold?
Well, Terry, today was a case study in the world in which we live. You had a situation where a man shows up unannounced, in a black large truck claiming that he has a bomb. The key moment, according to my sources, was they were able to look at this feed that he had put forth in which he talked about having an issue potentially with the president. He rambled. They were able to get a look at what appeared to be a canister. He talked about what was in the canister. And at that point, they simply didn't know what they had. Now, the interesting thing is that he kept saying, apparently, according to my sources and the video that the source confirmed to me, that he didn't want to hurt anybody. But at the same time, it was a situation where he had all these materials. So it was a situation where classic Washington style. They cannot afford to take anything not seriously. So because of that, they went through this process. They exercised a lot of patience. As one source said, that, look, we don't know if it's a person simply trying to get attention. The police chief said during the press conference that he was a person that had some kind of personal issues going on in his life, that there were issues that he was confronting. But clearly everyone is breathing a sigh of relief that he crawled out of the vehicle, turned himself in. Now they have the difficult task of simply going through the vehicle and making sure that there's nothing dangerous in the vehicle. But that process, I'm told, could take several hours.
And I want to bring in former FBI agent and ABC News contributor Brad Garrett on that point. Brad, as Pierre mentioned, the police insinuated that the suspect is going through some kind of a personal or family issue. They wouldn't expand on that any more than that. They also talked about finding some concerning things in the truck, including a propane tank, but again, didn't go into further details. So where do you think this investigation goes from here?
So the real key here, obviously, is what was his real intention. I mean, if you look where he parked this pickup truck, it's an odd place. Even though it's near the Capitol, he picks a day that Congress is not even in session, and he's willing to stay there several hours, live stream. This strikes me as a guy that's angry, has some revenge issues, maybe has some delusion, it sounds like, in reference to the president or the current government. And he feels powerless. People do these things that end up not hurting anyone because they want attention. I mean, why in the world would you live stream this unless you wanted attention? So once he got that, and in addition, you've got hostage negotiators that eventually got a cell phone to him, and with this live stream information, had a conversation and probably lowered the temperature inside that truck as far as his anger and rage, and eventually talked him out of it. So it's a fairly predictable, I guess, situation, the way it ended, if in fact his goal was ultimately not to hurt anybody.
Absolutely. And let's go down Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House now. Karen Travers covers the White House for us, a couple of miles away from this scene that, as I say, was tense for several hours. We've heard Kenneth and Pierre describe. So what was happening at the White House while all this was going down, Karen?
Terry, the White House said that they were monitoring the situation up on Capitol Hill, but since it has been resolved, they have not given a statement or weighed in. It's a pretty quiet day here at the White House. The president spending his day behind closed doors, no public events. There's no briefing with the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki. Terry, though, the security situation outside of the White House did seem to step up a little bit. The park that's just north of the White House, Lafayette Park, that's been open to tourists now for several weeks. Right now, it is closed. Secret Service had blocked off the entrances to the west, east, and north of that park. And for now, only people with passes were able to get in. So certainly they were keeping an eye on what was going on up there out of an abundance of caution, concerns that there would be something else happening down here on this end of Pennsylvania Avenue.
All right, Karen Travers, Kenneth Moten, Pierre Thomas, Brad Garrett, thanks very much on this busy and tense day that came to a good conclusion. Thanks.
Meanwhile, President Biden sat down for his first interview since the U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. As chaotic scenes play out in Kabul, the president is promising for the first time that the U.S. military will stay as long as it takes to get all Americans out. But he was also defiant, insisting now was the time to end this war. Here's George Stephanopoulos.
Back in July, you said a Taliban takeover was highly unlikely. Was the intelligence wrong, or did you downplay it?
There was no consensus. You go back and look at the intelligence reports. They said that it was more likely to be sometime by the end of the year.
You didn't put a timeline out when you said it was highly unlikely. You just said flat out it's highly unlikely the Taliban would take over.
Yeah. Well, the question was whether or not the idea that the Taliban would take over was premised on the notion that somehow the 300,000 troops we had trained and equipped was going to just collapse. They were going to give up. I don't think anybody anticipated that.
When you look at what's happened over the last week, was it a failure of intelligence, planning, execution, or judgment?
Look, I don't think it was a failure. Look, it was a simple choice, George. When the Taliban, let me put it another way. When you had the government of Afghanistan, the leader of that government getting in a plane and taking off and going to another country, when you saw the significant collapse of the Afghan troops we had trained, up to 300,000 of them, just leaving their equipment and taking off. That was, you know, that's what happened.
We've all seen the pictures. We've seen those hundreds of people packed into a C-17. We've seen Afghans falling.
That was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
What did you think when you first saw those pictures?
What I thought was we have to gain control of this. We have to move this more quickly. We have to move in a way in which we can take control of that airport. And we did.
So Americans should understand that troops might have to be there beyond August 31st.
No, Americans should understand that we're going to try to get it done before August 31st.
But if we don't, the troops will stay.
If we don't, we'll determine at the time who's left.
And
if there are American forces, if there's American citizens left, we're going to stay till we get them all out.
So, Diane, as you see, the president is defiant in the face of criticism. He believes this is the right strategy. He believes the United States has to get out. He believes we can counter any possible threats, and he's not conceding any mistakes in the execution.
All right, great interview. George Stephanopoulos, thank you for that. Meanwhile, Afghans trying to flee the country are being turned back by Taliban fighters outside the airport. The State Department and military also say they cannot guarantee safe passage to the airport for Americans. Senior foreign correspondent Ian Pannell is in Kabul with the latest. Hi, Ian.
Unfortunately, those terrible scenes of people desperate, in fear, trying to get out the country, the anguish, the agony down at the airport are just continuing into another day. On the American side, inside the airport itself, it's orderly, it's calm. They're getting people out. The U.S. military, the Air Force, doing an incredible, heroic job there, running these mercy flights out of the country. The issue is on the other side, where people are unable to get through, people with the right paperwork. We've been in touch with one woman who worked for USAID, the American Overseas Development Agency. She's also worked with the UN. She has the right paperwork. She went down to the gates that are manned by the Americans yesterday. She waited overnight together with a whole bunch of other people. She sent us some videos. And by 8 o'clock this morning, she said the Americans still hadn't opened the gate. So there are problems on both sides. It isn't just the Taliban. There are clearly issues with a joined-up policy that allows people through. And everyone apparently is working on this. The Americans say they're talking to the Taliban. The U.S. military understandably say they don't have the capacity to push out into Kabul to help get those people back in. But that's something everyone's looking at. And hopefully, in the coming days, they can get a system in place, because the disorder serves nobody. Elsewhere, we have seen those gunshots you can hear. It's Ashura, which is a Shia festival, a Shia Muslim festival. The Taliban are Sunni Muslims. But interestingly, we saw a parade go by where the Taliban were allowing them to go out and celebrate. So there are some positive signs, but there's still a lot of fear. A lot of women are essentially locked up at home, unable to go out. We are hearing stories of the Taliban going door to door in some parts of the country. Again, they say this isn't their policy, but they need to get control of the situation and be true to their word. So it's still fluid, it's still chaotic. People want to move in the right direction, but so far there's no sign of it. Ian Pannell, ABC News, Kabul.
Ian, thank you for that.
And Pentagon officials say there are now more than 5,200 U.S. troops on the ground in Kabul, and they have evacuated 7,000 people since Saturday, a small fraction of the thousands of Americans and tens of thousands of our allies remaining there. Right now, the military is aiming to airlift between 5,000 and 9,000 people per day, but the biggest obstacle, getting evacuees safely to the airport and processing them to be let inside, as Ian was just reporting. Let's go to our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, for more. Louis, so what are officials saying about their capability to get people out?
Terry, they say they have the aircraft within the Middle East region to be able to get them flying into Kabul if they need to get 5,000 to 9,000 people out a day. But according to the Pentagon's latest figures that we heard this morning, they're talking about an additional 2,000 that were taken out last night on board 12 aircraft that had flown into Kabul. So what they're looking for, as you said, is the demand. Can they fill up those aircraft? When I asked Pentagon spokesman John Kirby earlier today about about whether they could expect to see higher numbers of people approaching the gates that are being manned by the United States. He said that is the hope, because they have manned another gate that grants access to the airport, and they have surged additional consular officials to those gates so that they can greet the people and bring them on inside to validate their documents. I think the State Department has just said that there are about 6,000 people currently at the airport in Kabul that would be ready to board airplanes. So if that's a much higher number than we've seen already over the last 2 days. As the military has slowly built up from 2,000 a day, potentially we could see even more tomorrow. But the capability, the questions are, can these Afghan visa applicants, can they get through? Because they're the ones that are in greatest danger. They say that there is a deal with the Taliban that they will ensure the safe passage of Americans. It doesn't appear that that applies to Afghans. So the question is, what can be done to help them get through the security barriers?
A very tough question. Louis, let me ask you, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin yesterday said that the United States doesn't have the capability to get into Kabul to get people out. There are scattered reports of British special forces, maybe French special forces, going into the city and bringing people out, and that triggers the question among people who've seen that, well, if they can do it, why can't we? What do you make of that?
That is the capability that they brought inside to Afghanistan, specifically to the airport in Kabul. The British, we know they brought in 600 troops. I'm not sure about how many the French may have brought in, but they did bring special operations capabilities with them. So it's not a surprise that they can do this. Now, the question is, are they doing this quietly? Are they doing this with agreement by the Taliban? That's the question. Even if the United States had the capability, or had the Special Operations Forces capability, or even the convoy capability to go into Kabul to try to bring out Americans, to try to bring out Afghans, the question becomes, how would they get back safely into the airport? So to me, it means that you probably have to rely on some kind of a Taliban agreement to make that happen. And right now, you heard the Secretary of Defense say yesterday, we don't have that capability. I don't know, even if we did, whether we could get a guarantee from the Taliban that there would be no attacks on those convoys should they come back to the airport.
Right, and right now the mission is tens of thousands of people. I don't know if the French or the British have that kind of numbers. President Biden says that U.S. troops are going to stay now until all Americans are out of Afghanistan, even if that means staying past the August 31st deadline. So how long do you think the forces there can realistically maintain control of the airport?
They are in control of that airport. They say that it is very secure right now, that they control the perimeter. So that means that they are in charge of who is getting access to the base. It's essentially, if there is a base actually at the northern part of the civilian airport, they are the ones that are in charge of the perimeter. On the other side, just outside, is where those Taliban checkpoints are. And it's in between there. That's that first buffer zone that's really the toughest spot for the people who are trying to get out. Officials, when you talk to them here, they say that we can hold security there for as long as we need. One person asked, what about fuel for the aircraft? And we were told by the spokesman here that we have enough fuel capability at that airport to keep planes running for quite a long period of time. So when the president says August 31st, it sounds like it might be a viable option for the United States military to maintain operations there, even if they need to get beyond this August 31st deadline that the president had set earlier. And let's not forget, I mean, August 31st was an arbitrary date that the president had chosen himself. Originally, it was September 11th. So I think any adjustments can be made, Terry.
Yeah, and must be made, it seems like. Our senior Pentagon reporter, Louis Martinez, thanks very much.
Thanks, Terry.
So, what does Taliban leadership in Afghanistan mean for the global community and from the perspective of those who served? To answer that, we're joined by Tom Porter, representing the group Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and Darrell Blocker, ABC News contributor and former deputy director of the Counterterrorism Center at the CIA. Gentlemen, welcome to you both. And Tom, let me begin with you. You're also a captain in the U.S. Navy Reserve. You served in Afghanistan. We've heard everybody all the way up to the Secretary of Defense talk about what this feels like to watch this unfold after having served in that theater. Can you speak to what veterans and their families are experiencing watching the scenes in Kabul unfold, knowing that on September 11th anniversary, the Taliban are going to be in control there?
Thank you for having me. Good to be here with you today. First, I want to mention that I'm here just for Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and in no way speaking for DOD on this. This issue hits really close to home for me. Watching these scenes unfold, I lived on that base for over a year, so all of those scenes are very, very familiar. And then seeing the service members that we have out there providing security and securing people as they come into the airfield, they're just doing a brilliant job. And I just want Americans to know that the United States military service members are doing just amazing work, and they're brave, and they're doing dangerous things on our behalf. And so please just remember that whenever you meet them next. Bottom line is we've got an enormous amount of American citizens and Afghan allies that have stood side by side with us for 20 years, risking their lives, their families' lives, so that we can accomplish our mission. So we need to do all it takes, whatever it takes, to get everybody out and to safety.
Absolutely. That is what the Pentagon is saying. Daryl, President Biden says the Taliban's going through what he calls a, quote, existential crisis, promising moderation. We're already seeing violent response to some protests of the new government around the country. So what are you expecting? Is this Taliban 2.0, do you think?
Well, what I'm expecting is that the Taliban will look at the 70 nations within the UN that already institute and incorporate Sharia law into their systems. That's 1/3 of the UN member states. So they can go back to the draconian 1.0 version of 1994 through 2001, or they can adjust to the world and recognize that it doesn't have to be the way it was in the past. So that's on the Taliban regime to make a decision about whether they want to live in the past or when they want to adjust to the future.
You know, I just want to draw on your experience as an intelligence officer. A lot of finger pointing right now. Early days, there will be after action reviews, congressional hearings, all of it. Is this an intelligence failure, Daryl?
I think the word intelligence failure is just okay, policy fails and intelligence has a role in that. I don't see this as an intelligence failure, but I'm from the inside, so I'm a little biased. At the end of the day, this was predicted, whether it was 3, 6, 9 months. No one would have accepted somebody coming in and briefing them that the Taliban government would take over in 10 days, 2 weeks. It would just not have been, it just wouldn't have been accepted. No one would believe it, and now we're witnessing it.
Mm. And Tom, clearly the evacuation of our Afghan allies, that's personal, as you pointed out, for those who served alongside them, for journalists who worked with colleagues in Afghanistan. But you say the failure in planning for this dates all the way back to 2008 and the Special Immigration Visa Program's inception. That's the visa program for people who helped us in Afghanistan and Iraq. So how do you think this was missed back then? And do you blame the State Department for some of what's happening today?
Well, blame can be equally assigned to multiple administrations. So this goes way back. Oftentimes, we had called on the State Department to be able to step up their processing of these special immigrant visas. Again, these are for assisting those interpreters, mainly analysts, intelligence analysts, fixers that stood by our side and were in combat a lot of the times with our forces and with NATO forces during our conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so a lot of times there wasn't enough funding. A lot of times there wasn't enough personnel at the State Department to process them in time. But the result has been that there's been a large backlog of thousands of these visa applications. And here we are today. And if we had not had such a huge backlog, then a lot of this problem, it wouldn't exist. When you're evacuating from a country like this, you're still going to have problems no matter how well you plan for it. But if we hadn't had that large backlog in the special immigrant visas programs, we wouldn't be exactly where we are today. We'd be in a much better place.
A long history there. And Daryl, UN officials now warning that there could be dire food shortages in Afghanistan, noting that the Taliban's unlikely to receive the generous international aid that propped up the previous government. How do you think the global community should approach dealing with the Taliban?
I think both the Taliban and the global community are obligated to continue to administer well-established mechanisms for the 34 provinces of Afghanistan. There are more than just the Pashtuns, the Tajiks, the Hazaras, and the other Turkmen, Baluch, and tribes that are not the 40% of the makeup of the Taliban. So they are going to need to decide whether they're going to represent all of Afghans and partner with the United Nations to get food, to get water, to get assistance to those in need.
We'll see how that goes. That's the next problem, I guess. Daryl Blocker, Tom Porter, thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming out, the latest on the devastation in Haiti as the death toll from that massive earthquake tops 2,000. Our Matt Gutman is in Haiti with the harrowing stories from survivors and the rescue missions bringing hope when we come back. Welcome back to The Breakdown. Haiti is facing multiple crises after a deadly 7.2 magnitude earthquake rocked the island over the weekend. More than 2,000 people have been killed and thousands more have been injured or left homeless. Search and rescue efforts have been also hampered by a tropical storm Grace, bringing heavy rain and flooding. And all this comes just weeks after the assassination of the president of Haiti, Jovenel Moise. Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman is in Port-au-Prince with the latest on the recovery.
Hospitals gutted by the quake are filled with patients, many of them in tents or hallways. The Coast Guard medevacing over 100 patients, but even today, those injured in the quake continue arriving at the hospital.
Okay, does your neck hurt?
This is one of the patients who continues to trickle into hospitals like this. Survivors of the earthquake. He has a double pelvic fracture who have been suffering for days without medical care. And just 36 hours after Tropical Storm Grace plowed through here, these quake victims getting soaked as they waited for care at a hospital. Hundreds of others hunkering down in the soccer field amid downpours bringing up to 15 inches of rain.
It's not good here by the coast. My home was destroyed. I have nothing to use to sleep. Look, there's a lot of children here. I really have nothing.
But many chose to ride it out closer to their unlivable homes. Sarah and her extended family had been staying outside under this leaky tarp. And I asked them why they were smiling. They answered, because they're alive. The storm turning creeks into rivers of mud, pummeling the region. The following morning, we went back to check on Sarah and her family.
This is what's left of the tarp that they were under earlier. Obviously knocked down.
The winds from that storm rattling the bus all night long, making it impossible to sleep. They tell us they have no clothes other than what they're wearing. Everything else is wet from the storms, and many here are already feeling forgotten.
And overnight, there were additional aftershocks. We are told that more of those homes that were unstable came crumbling down. The need in the affected areas is so intense. What people say they need most are tarps and water and food. Matt Gutman, ABC News, Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Our thanks to Matt for that reporting. And that does it for us on The Breakdown today. Thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm Terry Moran. We'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Have a great day.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.